On today's episode of Curve Ahead, we have Geordy Murphy, the founder of Fobesoft. And as always, I'm Brian Wiles, your host and founder of Odyssey. Well, welcome to the podcast. Do you mind introducing yourself and telling me a little bit about your background?
Sure. My name is Geordy Murphy from Fobesoft.com. I've been in the restaurant business my whole career, which transitioned about 7 or 8 years ago to the tech world, but it's a piece of technology for restaurants. I owned and operated restaurants in San Francisco for 18 years. I worked for the Kimpton Group for a number of years, was a partner with Wolfgang Puck when we built Post Trio together. And then I went off on my own and I had Geordy's Restaurant, which in 94 was top 10 best new restaurants in the country by Esquire magazine, Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, New York Times, etc. And then I had an idea with a business partner and we did a chain of 6 Asian noodle restaurants throughout the Bay Area. That was in 99, one of the 5 hottest concepts in the country. I basically sold out of my ownership there, moved back to Florida to raise our kids, and started a company called Cypress Hospitality Group, which were headhunters for the hospitality business. And that business is ongoing today. It's 22 years old. But about 7 or 8 years ago, I started a company called Fobesoft, and Fobesoft means food and beverage software. And if you want a little background, I can tell you why I did it.
Absolutely. That's the next question. So what inspired you to go in and start Fobesoft?
Okay, well, I was getting calls from friends of mine in the Bay Area that own restaurants. Could you run numbers for me? Would you look at my P&L, et cetera? And I had a process when I had the 6 Asian noodle restaurants where I would load the program. It was dated, and that's not what Fobesoft is today. And I had to make it simple. So the managers would put in food, beer, wine, liquor sales, front of house, back of the house labor, and whatever they spent that day, and they'd fax it to me on like a profit and loss statement. And I'd have 6 of them in the morning, and I'd look at them and decide where I was going to go. Because the restaurant business is notoriously called a rear view mirror business, meaning that you operate for a month and then you wait for certain bills or whatever to come in and you look behind and ask the bookkeeper or accountant, did we make money last month? Well, in a lot of situations, that's too late to fix a mistake. And if that mistake is compounded into the next month, then you're already behind there. So what happened was probably 7 or 8 years ago, I'm a cyclist. I was riding my bike and I was listening to Steve Jobs' book, and he said, if you can identify a problem and solve that problem, you have opportunity. And that's kind of what I was looking at, saying, okay, there's a big problem here. There's a big void. So I went into my office that day and I found, it took me a week or so to find a programmer. And Raj and I built Fobesoft, and then we started bringing on customers, and I hired a guy named Matthew Sloan, and then the pandemic hit. So all the customers we had went away because every restaurant closed. So I found a small little angel fund in Orlando, Florida that gave us some money. And at this time, we were lucky enough to meet a person at Cisco Foods. So we white labeled the product for Cisco. Their version is Proactive, P-A-N-D-L. And then we started working with some other salespeople along on our own also. And what Fobesoft does is it gives a restaurant a full profit and loss statement from sales through rent compared to a budget, and it runs month to date. And it's either red or green. So if you're hitting your budget, it's green. If you're over in any categories, it turns red. And a little bullion pops up and it tells you, how can I get my chemicals for my dish machine down? You know, I'm spending too much on them. How can I get my linen and laundry figure down? And we have suggestions for all these things. How can I lower my food costs? What do I do about my labor? And it's been very helpful for a lot of restaurants.
That's incredible. It's cool to see a story, right, that organically kind of develops into something. You're like, oh, I've got some experience doing this thing, and it really turns into a business. And those are the cases for me that really I've always find super intriguing. So let me ask you a question. You had mentioned that as an entrepreneur, you have a couple of different ventures. How do you decide to balance your time between the two? Like, how do you determine which one gets priority that day or
Well,
that hour or what have you?
I basically have a partner at Cypress Hospitality Group now, the headhunting company, and she's wonderful. She does a great job. So I pretty much ferret out some of the work through different ways, and we have a lot of customers or clients that have been with us for a long time. So once we get the work order, that pretty much runs itself. I spend the majority of my time on Fobesoft because we're growing, and being a restaurateur and getting into the tech space, it's eye-opening. But I have some great people that work with us, a couple of great partners, and that's what's really helped, especially dealing with some of the bigger, broadliner like Cisco Foods. We have some other partners, Seven Shifts, Pop Menus, some other people out there that, we help each other or what have you. But we're constantly evolving, with technology. You have to stay ahead of the curve. Like now, when I mentioned a minute ago that my managers would put down the food, beer, wine, liquor sales, front of house, back of the house labor, whatever they spent that day. What we've done now is we've made the product almost completely seamless. So we import the sales from the point of sale system. We import the labor, front of house, back of the house, because the salaries are built in the back end, and that populates the cell every day. So we import the front of house, back of the house labor from either the point of sale system or an app, a labor app. And then we have EDI connections with all the major broadliners, which means that when the invoice gets to the front door of the restaurant, we have it at the same time. And we've built a piece of AI along with, we enhanced Microsoft Azure. So when the invoice comes in, it parses to the proper cell in the P&L every day. And now if it's not a major broadliner, what we did is we built an app that's got AI. We're 97% accurate with it. So you just take you can write down 5 pounds of ahi tuna on a napkin at $10.95 and take a picture of it, and it uploads to the cloud and parses to food, specifically seafood, because we have that broken out if you want. So now we're giving people a profit loss statement every day compared to a budget that runs month to date, and they barely have to touch anything. So they're getting this information with almost no work. But the reason that I built the system like this was back in the day. I mean, I had a restaurant that was struggling. I had no place to turn, didn't know who to ask. I was sitting there in the 4 walls. It's like, well, what do you do? Because it can become overwhelming, even if you have a successful restaurant. So what we've done is we've broken it out into sales, cost of goods, labor, controllables, and non-controllables. And we tell someone that if they work with us and if they work our system, they can find a point in cost of goods, they can find a point in labor, they can find at least a point in controllables, and a point in non-controllables. So you're looking at 4 points. So if your restaurant's making 10%, now you're making 14%, that's a 40% increase in your profit. I mean, it's massive. But there's so many the restaurant business is definitely a business of penny. And, I heard something, I was watching Netflix a while ago, and there's a chef who's one of the hottest chefs in the country right now. His name's Evan Funky. He has Felix in LA and a couple other restaurants. And on Netflix, he said his very first restaurant that he opened, he went out of business. They said, well, what did you learn? He goes, I learned, number one, that you need to know the financial part of the business. And then Jose Andres, they asked him, Jose Andres, what's the number one thing you need to do for a new restaurateur needs to do? And he says, understand the financial. So we've made it very simple. We have some of our clients they told us probably, 8 or 9 months ago, you not only have increased my profit, you turn my manager into an operator. Because what it does is it teaches someone the financial piece of the business simply. It's not, there's some accounting systems out there that are great, but you need a bookkeeper or an accountant, and you're not getting the information every single day.
I want to ask along the lines of turning managers into operators, right? I think that's such a powerful thing to empower employees to be able to see at a glance, hey, we've got problems here, here, and here. How do we address it? And having a software like yours seems like it already is providing the potential solution on how to address those problem areas. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, let's just start with like we call them the fixes. If you know something, your food cost turns red. So okay, it looks like my food cost is getting out of whack. And you click on the fixes, and it's like, have you costed out all your dishes? So a lot of people, or I know when I owned restaurants or whatever, it's like, hey, let's do this for this, that, for that, and then you put the plate together. Oh, this looks like it's worth $22.95. Well, if you cost that dish out, you could find out you're running a 45% food cost on it. So one of the first things we do is tell someone, let's cost out all the dishes on your menu and see what they cost. And then at the end of the month, let's do a theoretical food cost. If you sold 20 fish and 35 shrimp dishes and 18 steaks times what those cost for what you sold them for, ideally this is what your food cost should be. Now, if it's 1 or 2 points high, you have an issue. How do we attack it? But we can also break out your food cost in meat, poultry, seafood, dairy, produce, and grocery. So if there is an issue, you can pinpoint or hone in on where that problem could be. Controllables are one of the huge ones. And that's where we teach a lot of the managers how they turn into operators, because the majority of restaurants out there, they say, okay, I'm going to go hire a bookkeeper and that person should be able to keep me straight. Well, half the time that person doesn't know restaurant accounting. So they take one category called supplies and they dump everything into supplies. But the reality is you want kitchen supplies, restaurant supplies, china, glass, and silver, linen and laundry, chemicals. Now, everybody in the industry wants your chemical business, your dish machine, because it's constantly running. You're using it all day long. You go through a lot of product. But there's a thing that on the dish machines that a lot of people don't know. You can calibrate how much soap goes through the machine. So, and I'm not saying that there's nefarious soap salespeople out there, but as a manager, you want to know what should my machine be calibrated to, because you could run that thing for a month and not know, and you're dumping twice as much soap in, and that's the soap and chemicals are expensive. I mean, we're $500, $600, $800. Now you talk to the chef and say, these guys, I need this or I need that or whatever. Well, can you wait till we've got this much stuff? When you look at it, the budget, I've got $600 left in the month. Well, I need a new RoboCoo that's $1,700. Well, can you get by with 2 weeks? Because what it also does is it helps your cash flow. A lot of people think that, this broke, I need it right now, so I'm going to get one tomorrow. In some cases, you need to. But in a lot of cases, you don't. So when you break them out on each different category and someone can see where they're spending, who's spending what and where's the money going, that's what gives you an idea on all the little pieces in the restaurant business.
So does Fobesoft do, as an organization, do you consult with the restaurants that you have onboarded onto the software, or is it primarily here's how to find your solution through the software itself?
No, we have an onboarding call with the owner or the decision maker, where if they have any financials, we get their financials and put them into our system as best we can. Because the reason that we have it and that it works is because it's set up this way, the way we've set it up. So then we have an onboarding call and we go through the items with the person. We brought a woman chef on in the Southeast, and she was a sous chef, very talented, became a chef, very talented. So people put her in business, but she had never run a business before. Very talented chef. And on the very first phone call, we saved her $37,000 annually over credit card fee, because she didn't know the discount rate. And when we said, well, you can just go back to your person and talk to them, she immediately got them lowered because it's so competitive, that piece. But there's numerous things that we can do, and we totally help the customer. We had just last week a pizza restaurant in Southern California called their support person and said, I've got another restaurant. You've done such a great job with this one. I need to put the other one on it. And it's just pointing some of these things out to people. Because, I know from history, you get caught in the four walls and you're in there 10, 12 hours a day, 5, 6 days a week. Sometimes having someone to ask a question to is very helpful. And our whole support team comes They're all general managers or director of operations from other restaurants throughout their whole career. So they're all very sharp people.
You had mentioned that you had previously worked with a chef or a sous chef who was promoted to a chef who's then opened their own restaurant and didn't necessarily know the financials on how to run the restaurant. Is that something that's fairly common to happen in the restaurant industry? If you're talented enough, you have these opportunities and then you're able to open your own restaurant, but you may not have all the background or know the math behind how to operate a business like that?
It is, I don't want to use the word prevalent, but it's the majority of the restaurants out there. And it's just the way, or I mean, the people that buy a franchise that have never been in the restaurant business. Oh, that looks fun. That looks like it can make a lot of money. Let me go do this. Or they run another business. It's like the dentist who thinks that, I'm going to help finance this chef and I'm going to be in the restaurant business. I understand business, but it's a different business. We had a new person join 6 months ago, and they said, could you please teach me, show me the way that the process of Fobesoft works with the profit and loss statement. So I said, get the last 4 restaurants that have signed up with us, get me their P&Ls. We'll go through them and I'll show you. So the last 4 P&Ls that I got from these restaurants, none of them were correct from the bookkeepers that they were using. Instead of like food, beer, wine, liquor, one of them was MasterCard, Visa, American Express, Discover Card. That was their sales. So, I mean, then their cost of goods were Cisco, Cheney Brothers, Benny Keith. That was their sales, which there's no way when you're looking at it like that, you can get a true cost of goods. Or another one, which was interesting. They said, well, I'm running a 25% food cost. Well, they were off total sales, but off their food sales, their food cost was 38%. And they wanted to, so it's like 10 points higher than they had expected. And once we pointed that out to them, they're like, oh my gosh. And it's nobody's fault. It's just restaurant accounting is not manufacturing accounting. Everything from your sales is not calculated off your total sales. It's calculated off that section of sales, either food, beer, wine, or liquor. So, I mean, that's one of the main issues. And then being able to break out all the different categories. Not a lot. We find the ones that move the needle. So, we don't want everybody operating the way, I used to have like 20 different categories because I wanted to know where everything was going.
Restaurants typically have pretty low margins, correct?
Depending on the restaurant. But yes, that's kind of what people say.
And is that because of the style of accounting that restaurants typically use? Or no, just because a lot of the bills come in arrears?
The margins typically have to do with the style of restaurant that it is. Like if you're a steakhouse or say a barbecue restaurant, you have a lot of proteins, and those are more expensive than say a taco shop or a pizza restaurant or an Italian restaurant. You're serving pasta and sauces and dough and the most expensive thing kind of is your cheeses, versus steaks that are, you can run a 40 or 42% cost on a ribeye. The difference is that if you have a high-end steakhouse and you have the volume, it's almost like a flip. Your labor is going to be lower because your sales are higher, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas, when an Italian restaurant, you're going to run a lower food cost. You just are. But it's typically the style of restaurant. And then, of course, the pizza restaurants, those are the most expensive thing on the menus, basically the cheese that they put on it. And then, you got your pepperonis and sausages and stuff. But yeah, it depends on the type of restaurant. Like I had a friend, he said, well, I want to open a restaurant and do burgers. I'm like, that's fine, but people don't understand it. Those can be super labor intensive. You have 4 people sit down that are going to order a burger. All 4 are going to be different. One's want cheese, one's wants medium rare, one's want no pickles, this one wants tomatoes. I mean, once you're back there and you have tons of these tickets laying up there and they're all different, you need people back there to be able to produce them to get them out. So if you're going to just open a restaurant, you got to kind of think through it. And also you end up saving money in your build out when you have the menu, you can design the kitchen somewhat around the menu. So people, you don't need extra people. People can work at, at two stations at one time, et cetera, when it gets slower. It's things like that you think about.
On the same topic of like food costs, since there has been, at least on the consumer side, non-restaurant side, an increase in food costs, has that impacted you to be able to acquire new customers for Fobesoft?
Oh yes, everything like that helps. But the thing that people need to understand if you're a restaurateur is like everybody knows the price of food's gone up. I saw just in one of my feeds the other day that I think something like, proteins have gone up like, 15, 16, 18%. But that's where I get back to, if you do a theoretical food cost and you know how much every item on the menu costs you, then you look at how many of them you sold. For instance, like a restaurateur is like, oh, the price of food's gone up, so I'm going to raise all my prices. Well, you might only need to raise one or two, which kind of doesn't get noticed on the menu. Because the people, that restaurant raised all their prices, so, whatever. But if you raise one or two, you have an item that you sell 1,250 of them a month, and you raise it 50 cents, all of a sudden you've got $675 more in sales. So you're going to drop depending on, how high a volume is, it's going to affect your food cost that way. So you can do things like that strategically versus just across the board. But it has gotten a lot more difficult, not just in the food costs, but labor also, in your controllables. I mean, things have just gotten more expensive, which means you should be paying a lot more attention to every single thing that you buy. And that's where we give you the opportunity to do that in an easy platform. It's super simple. You can look at it every day. I mean, I know that back in the day when I got my P&Ls from one of my noodle joints, and I'm like, how did the guy spend $425 on cups? So I go in there and I find out that it was toward the end of the month, and if you buy this, I'll give you a deal and 2 tickets to the baseball game. So, I mean, there's things like that are fun that, the salespeople have to sell their goods also, but you also, you have to, as the manager or whatever of the restaurant, that's your main focus.
You had mentioned kind of the restaurant businesses understanding better of their prices. What are your thoughts on some of these fees that restaurants are adding to a bill at the end of the evening? Whether not necessarily like a 20% gratuity, but like more of a 5% restaurant service fee. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's tough. I think it's, trying to pass everything on to the consumer is maybe not fair. It depends on where you're doing business and what, I know in certain cities, the restaurants are getting charged fees by the city to provide certain things. And I mean, I think that's a tough question. Because where do you draw the line? How can, you're paying your rent, so your common area maintenance charges, you're paying your taxes, then all of a sudden someone walks in and goes, we're going to charge you 4% because we want to be able to give these, services to these people or whatever that aren't necessarily your customers. And you as the restaurant owner are just supposed to eat it. On the other hand, I'm a good customer at this restaurant, and because I want to go there, they're going to charge me an additional 2 or 3%. So what am I going to do? Instead of tipping 20%, I'm going to tip 17%. No, because that person's still doing their job. I mean, it's just, I think that it's almost not fair that it's gotten to that in some places, where there are these fees that get passed on. I know in some situations, restaurants are passing on the credit card fee, So, and I kind of understand that one maybe a little bit, but it's tough. The thing is, though, is if you are on top of your financials and you're making a decent profit, you don't necessarily need to add these additional fees. You can pay your own credit card fees because there's enough in there. There's enough if you're doing decent, and we have kind of a rule of thumb. If your rent factor is 6%, you should be able to make a decent profit. When it gets higher, 7, 8%, all of a sudden now it's getting, I've seen restaurants at 10% rent factor, which makes it more difficult depending on their volume. But when you look at a rule of thumb like that, then you make the other numbers work. Then we have a term called manage to the bottom line. And on a Monday, if you're doing the schedule, how much money I have to spend on front of house labor between now and through next Sunday. And another thing is that people don't understand, if you do your schedule and you have X amount of hours, X amount of labor every week. Now, if you were to send someone home an hour early in the front of the house and an hour early in the back of the house, you saved about $17,000 or $18,000 a year if you could do that thing, which is crazy. Yeah. But if you're looking at $14, $15 an hour, times 2 is $30, plus your labor load, 1.25. Now all of a sudden you're looking at $38, $39 a day. I mean, you're, $14, $15, $18,000. That can pay your rent for a couple of months.
Yep.
So those are the things that you really have to pay attention to, as a restaurateur. I know at the end of the night, people are tired, they've worked hard or whatever, and you have someone sitting at the bar having their shift drink or whatever, and they're still on the clock. That's going to cost you an hour. And you don't want to be, a Scrooge, but it's a business. And you have to treat it like a business.
Right. Honestly. So I think my thought, going back to talking about the fees, I think my thought on that is that as long as the restaurant is transparent with me that they're charging a fee and I get a little bit of understanding of what they plan to do with it, I've got no problem paying that fee. It's when I've had a meal and I'm and I'm getting the check that I see 2 or 3 fees at the bottom, then it's like, okay, now I'm annoyed.
Yeah.
I want to take it out on somebody, and typically it hurts the server who may have done a fantastic job. So as long as you're transparent on having fees added into your bill, totally fine with that.
No, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest? You have something on the front or on the menu that says, just FYI, there's these fees involved, or a fee. I think a fee would be okay if you have 2 or 3 fees.
Yeah, I mean or like a disclaimer at the bottom on gratuity, right? Say if you have a party larger than 5, gratuity of 20%, it's automatically added, and X service fee. Like, even if it's just at the bottom of the menu, that's totally fine in my book. All right, so let's change up topics a little bit. Let's talk about advice. What advice would you give to someone who's considering starting their own business?
Well, number one, know your financials and know the business that you're going into. Make sure you potentially have some support and someone to bounce questions off of. Talk to someone maybe that's been in that business before. Networking is a great thing to do. I have a son that's at the University of Florida right now, and he's become quite the little networker. He calls friends of mine or friends of friends and see if they'll meet with him for 30 minutes or so. And he has a list of questions he can ask. But try to learn a little bit, or the business that you're going into, and understand how the financials work and what you're going to need to do to make it successful.
I would agree. Understand the finances, having support system, network. I'm not so strong on the networking piece, but I try.
It's crazy. I mean, it can snowball.
Oh yeah.
And that's what you kind of want, because I'll tell you, it's a funny story. My son did an internship this summer, and it was with a real estate investment company, and they found this piece of property. They said they would do some office buildings, small office condo type thing. And they did this presentation or what have you. Well, a month or so goes by, and he found out the person that eventually bought that piece of property and is doing exactly what they were talking about doing in their internship. So he got on LinkedIn and linked in with the guy, and he went and met with him, and he spent an hour and a half with him. So now,
That's cool.
as the project goes along, he's going to call my son Daniel, and say, hey, come look at this. This is where we are here, or whatever. The guy was super nice, and that's just when things like that happen, because people do want to help others, especially some people are like, oh, it's my business. I don't want you getting in my business or whatever. But you're going to find there's a ton of people out there that want to help.
I think as long as you're showing a genuine interest in what they do, people are pretty open about their business and how they want to step it forward or just share like their journey along the way. I think that
Agreed.
people are
I
pretty
agree.
open as long as you're genuinely interested.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right, which brings me into the next question or statement or both. So being a founder can be really hard. Why is it that you chose to do it?
Maybe because I have a hard time working for other people. I have always been a team player, but I kind of, and I don't want it to sound incorrect. I mean, but I've always thought if there's, I learned years ago, if you see a situation, try to come up with 3 solutions to that situation and think about those 3 different solutions and which would be the best one. Versus you see a situation and you just act. Half the time that's going to be the wrong thing to do. You can fix it, but it's going to take a minute to be able to do that. And also, I think because I like to make decisions and move on, as opposed to sit there and dwell on things. You can always turn around and then back off the situation or decision, but it's just in the industry that I was in, I was never going to get to where I wanted to be working for someone else, unless all of a sudden they're like, hey, here, we're going to give you 10 or 15% of the business. Because in the restaurant business, it's very costly to get into. You need to carve out, your own opportunity if you're going to do it. And you kind of need to be in charge. And that's what started it. I felt I was doing a great job for others, making them a ton of money, and not being able to share in it, which a lot of people feel that way, but then you find out that maybe it wasn't me, it was the business. That's just in the location and the things like that. But that's pretty much why. I just wanted to be my own guy, I guess.
Yeah, it's hard making decisions on the behalf of someone else's business and having them be the ones who financially benefit from it. That was one of my biggest challenges, is seeing that, hey, I'm helping generate like millions of dollars in revenue for the company that I was working for, and I'm like, I mean, my bonus at the end of the year was like $2,000. I was like, oh, cool, but my former CEO got, like a $60 million pay bump. I was like, okay, cool. That's not.
I took a restaurant doing less than 2 million. I took it to over $7 to $8 million.
Wow.
I took it from losing money to making 24% profit.
Wow.
And I walked in and made it happen, because they were all investors and such that were involved. So, seeing that situation, I mean, that's what kind of said, yeah, I need to do this by myself. So I did.
I get it. So what keeps you motivated as a founder?
Growth, showing what we have to people and seeing people, like just last week, a guy with a pizza restaurant calls up and says, I need to put my other restaurant on there. I mean, that is very satisfying. So, I mean, that motivates me. And, one of the hardest things to do, any tech person is going to tell you this, is to get your product in front of people. It's very difficult these days. People are swiping, the phone, and everything's going on. And in the restaurant business, it's hair on fire. I mean, we have a guy that wanted to sign up with us, and it took him 3 weeks because he was attending bar, lunch, and dinner. He couldn't find the time, and he's the owner. He couldn't find a bartender. I mean, and so I understand that piece of it. But to give you we close 35 to 40% of the demos that we do. Wow. So for us, it's just showing people what we do. Every single person in the last 4 or 5 years that we've been doing this sees the value in what we're doing. They don't all sign up, but a lot of them do. And we've been in front of, and are in front of a couple of very large restaurant companies, which is cool. I mean, that's what motivates me.
Yeah, it's cool to watch customers grow and learn and do things better in their business because of something that you helped create or helped them realize, hey, I can do this part of my business better and have them also be successful.
Right. I mean, it's very satisfying.
All right, so we've come to the end of the podcast. This is where I give you 90 seconds to plug anything you're passionate about. It could be Fobesoft, it could be a charity, just anything. So the next 90 seconds is yours to do whatever you would like with it.
Okay, so Fobesoft is food and beverage software, Fobesoft.com. My email is geo@Fobesoft.com. My phone number is 904-813-5294. Now, if you need a chef, a general manager, or anybody like that, it's Cypress, CYPRESS Hospitality Group. And my email is geo@cypresshospitalitygroup.com. Same phone number. So it's geo@fobesoft.com or geo@cypresshospitalitygroup.com. And we can definitely help you.
Awesome.
How's that?
Love it. I appreciate your time
Brian.
today, and I can't wait for the feedback on this episode.
Awesome. It's a pleasure meeting you, Brian. I thank you.
You as well.